Good morning, grade 3s. Welcome to our next numeracy lesson. I hope that you loved last week's lesson, that you had loads of fun, and that you learnt a lot. In today's lesson, we are going to be doing doubling and halving. I know that you have learnt about doubling and halving before, but we are just going to revise it today. But first, let's get our brains thinking. Quickly call out the answer. Let's check your answers. 2 times 3 is 6. 3 times 5 is 15. 4 times 2 is 8. 10 times 3 is 30. 2 times 8 is 16. 5 times 4 is 20. Well done if you got those all correct. Keep practicing. Doubling. There are steps that you take in order to do a doubling sum. If you always follow the steps, your answers will always be correct. Step number 1. Break up the number into hundreds, tens, and units. Step number 2. Double the hundreds, tens, and units. And step number 3. Add the hundreds, tens, and units together. Let's have a look at this example. Double 243. Step number 1, we break up the hundreds, tens, and units. So it's 200 plus 40 plus 3. Step number 2, we double the hundreds, tens, and units. So what is double 200? It is 400. Double 40 is 80, and double 3 is 6. Step number 3, we add them all together. 400 plus 80 plus 6 equals 486. Our next example is 132. Step number 1, we break up the hundreds, tens, and units. So it's 100 plus 30 plus 2. Step number 2, we need to double the hundreds, tens, and units. So double 100 is 200, double 30 is 60, and double 2 is 4. Step number 3, we add them all together. 200 plus 60 plus 4 equals 264. Our next example is a bit more tricky, so you need to keep your thinking caps on. Step number 1, we break up the hundreds, tens, and units. So it's 300 plus 10 plus 6. Step number 2, we need to double the hundreds, tens, and units. So double 300, 600. Double 10 is 20. Double 6 is 12. Step number 3, we add them all together. 600 plus 20 plus 12 is 632. We are now moving on to halving. The steps for halving is very similar to the steps for doubling. Step number 1, you break up the number into hundreds, tens, and units. Step number 2, you halve the hundreds, tens, and units. And step number 3, we add the hundreds, tens, and units all together. This is our first example. Halve 268. Step number 1, we break up the number. 200 plus 60 plus 8. Step number 2, we halve the hundreds, tens, and units. So half of 200 is 100. Half of 60 is 30, and half of 8 is 4. Step number 3, we add them all together. 100 plus 30 plus 4 equals 134. Our next example is 842. Step number 1, you break up the hundreds, tens, and units. So it's 800 plus 40 plus 2. Step number 2, we halve the hundreds, tens, and units. What is half of 800? 400. What is half of 40? 20. And what is half of 2? 1. Step number 3, we add them all together. 400 plus 20 plus 1 equals 421. Look at these. You need to keep these in mind. Half of 1 is half. Half of 3 is 1.5. Half of 5 is 2.5. Half of 7 is 3.5. And half of 9 is 4.5. Have a look how we write the number half. It's a 1, a line, and a 2. Half of 10 is 5. Half of 30 is 15. Half of 50 is 25. Half of 70 is 35. And half of 90 is 45. You can refer back to this at any time. Let's have a look at this example. 463. Step number 1, we break up the number into hundreds, tens, and units. 400 plus 60 plus 3. Step number 2, we need to halve the numbers. What is half of 400? 200. What is half of 60? 30. What is half of 3? 1.5. Step number 3, we add them all together. 200 plus 30 plus 1.5 equals 231.5. Activity time. This is what you will need for this activity. Paper or the printed worksheet that I provided, a pencil to write with, and an eraser in case you make any mistakes. This shows the worksheet that I'd provided for you. If you weren't able to print it, it is okay. Write your answers on your piece of paper. The one side of our worksheet is doubling and the other side is halving. The steps are there for you. Try and tackle these sums and let's see how you do. Have fun, work neatly, and lastly, enjoy.